Welcome to co-chair this session, Professor Colin Bradford, non-resident senior fellow of the Global Economy and Development Program, the Brookings Institution, and Dr. Wang Huiyao, president and founder at the Center of China and Globalization.
下面有请分论坛主持人、布鲁金斯学会全球经济与发展项目高级研究员、中西对话发起人科林·布莱特福德先生和全球化智库理事长、国务院原参事王辉耀先生，大家掌声欢迎。
好的，我们今天很高。
We are very efficient today, and we are now starting the second roundtable.
Table of this afternoon, and as we have seen in the first roundtable, I mean this theme is very highly relevant. Is that we're having the China-West dialogue and how we can find ways to really find out where we can coexist and collaborate. So this is very important. I think we have heard many good views from the roundtable, and of course we're going to hear more this time. And then we're going to collect them, and then we're going to digest them, and then put them into a good recommendation. Perhaps I could also start with some personal views as well on this issue. Is that we are very fortunate that we are having this roundtable with so many think tanks from around the world, particularly from China, from US, from EU, and from other countries, and so we can have really in-depth dialogue, and that's why we set enough time to do that. So we talk a bit about the difference we have in our the morning section, but particularly the afternoon first section, how we can really shorten the gap and minimize the differences, and that's really the topic we're talking. So and we know, as Colin has mentioned, there's a social divide, there's a gap of wealth. And that has all driven up of deglobalization and populism and also the social media. So and also constant communication among people and spread of the any sentiment or dissatisfaction that second minute you can really transfer to the whole world. So in that kind of new situation, where can we help? So we talk about this morning about China-U.S. relations because that is probably one of the key between China and the West relation. I'm thinking about it is really into a multipolar world, but of course U.S. is still the key pillar, but we can't deny there's other pillars coming up, and so how we can really cooperate together in this sense. So what I hear, I'd like to propose a few ideas. I've been talking that to Colin in the past. First, of course, is the climate. I think climate is really the enemy number one for the mankind. We all know that. We whether we like it or not, we felt the impact. For example, I never heard in Beijing, this summer there was a flood and there's a few dozen people dead because Beijing has a flood. And you can imagine how serious that can be. And now, worldwide, everywhere, it's fires and floods and everything, and even earthquakes and things like that. So the natural climate and climate change it's really happening and is affecting every one of us. So in that sense, I think we all have the common ground. I was so encouraged by the dialogue I hosted last month in Beijing at 9th China and Globalization Annual Forum. I invited Minister Xie Zhenghua, the Chinese climate envoy, and also I invited Nick Burns, the current U.S. ambassador, and also EU ambassador Toledo to the roundtable, and then we have a 30 ambassador also attending with 150 people there also. at that roundtable, you hear cooperation, how we can really work together. Minister Xie said he has actually, in the last 2 months, he had 50 Zooms, dialogues with John Kerry. They are very, very much working on, and then he expressed interest to visit the United States. And Ambassador Nick Burns welcomes that. And so was such a good spirit. And also EU Ambassador Toledo talked about how EU can be more active. So I think, climate change is probably the most low-hanging fruit that we can build up the consensus to work. I think right now, if you open the television and the radio, there was always negative news, except what Professor Lu just mentioned about Governor of California. We hear some good news. But most of the time, you take on the television, it's all bad news. And then in that kind of environment, how can you collaborate? I think the collaboration needs good environment. So I think climate change is something we all feel in common. And actually, Minister Xie said at that time at the roundtable, he said, President Xi said at the UN summit, before 2030, China reach carbon neutral. Before 2060, China reach carbon peak. 2030 carbon peak and 2060 carbon neutral. It was not by, it was before. So before means that could be a few years ahead of schedule. So let's really see. Minister Xi mentioned that the other day, which is very important. So I think we have a lot of common knowledge to work on that. So I think we should, think tank like this, roundtable like this, we should really expand, the common denominator, like climate change, facing this threat of all mankind, and we need to work on. And particularly China, US, and EU, the 3 largest economy, the 3 largest emitters in the world, have a moral responsibility to work together. So that's my first recommendation, that let's really focus something that we can work on and make it happen, and so create some good atmosphere to continue other cooperation. The other thing I would like to talk about, the second recommendation, is that infrastructure now become a globally recognized, public good, and deficit for that for the developing countries is enormous. We all know that China realized that first. There's a saying in China, if you want to be rich, build roads first. And then China started earnestly on that for the last 4 decades. And it's greatly transformed China. Anywhere you go, 5-6 hours by fast train. 70% of the world 5G stations are in China. 7 out of the 10 largest, container ports are in China. And, this infrastructure has transformed China into second largest economy and lifted 800 million people out of poverty. So 10 years ago, China launched the Belt and Road Initiative, which basically aimed at the global south and developing countries to provide infrastructure. But I'm very glad to see, out of China's initiative, now US has put infrastructure into their agenda as well, Build Back Better World, B3W. EU has put this into their agenda, EU Global Gateway. I'm also hearing that EU is going to have a summit about EU Global Gateway right after Belt and Road very soon now, which is good. I mean, we all talk about this infrastructure deficit the whole world, particularly developing countries, are facing. So this is another area we can work together. Why not we have the World Bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Asian Development Bank, African Development, European Construction Bank, and Latin American Bank. They all, build on the similar charters, and they share the same language. We had a conference last month. The World Bank said they had worked very well, extremely well with the AIB. They have many projects working together. So why don't we really get those international development banks work together? And and let's really take a part of the BI, B3W, EU Global Gateway, and also this India, Middle East, and Europe Economic Corridor. Let's go all those infrastructure together. So that's the other thing we could work together. Thirdly, which probably is my last recommendation for this roundtable, is that we know there's a migration crisis and there's global talent crisis going on, in different parts of the world. And then, China is the largest talent circulating country. US is the largest talent attracting country, and of course European too. So on the talent mobility and talent supply to the developing countries, can we really restore those Peace Corps and all those different programs? Let's get world talent, global governance to some degree, and then China, US, EU, that we can all work together to help in developing countries. And then, for example, universities of the world should work together. I mean, academics should work together. And the same is true of the think tanks. So really, I felt in that perspective, we can do more to find similar common objectives so that we don't really go so differently with each other on the geopolitical tension. So that's what I really want to open this second roundtable, and I felt that we have all the think tanks. Well, and also the global digital is another area, and I know Bruno has a lot of knowledge on that, which I think China, US, EU should set good examples and then find a way to work. And EU has a good position. China has a position, and US has a position. EU is in the middle of this in terms of regulatory. But then we can really try to maximize the similarity and minimize the difference, so that we can pave the way for the standardization of the world in the future to come. So I really think that it's so important we get this dialogue. We had 30, we got 50 think tanks from different parts of the world, over 10 from US this time. So it's really great, and we hope that, and also 20, 30 think tanks from China participated. And we hope that the voice out of China, particularly if we have some joint statement of similar views, will be really set a good example for the policy community to take our recommendations and move things forward. So I'm really happy that we're having this dialogue, and I want to also congratulate Colin on this initiative. We've been planning this for quite a few rounds, but we did the Berlin Forum, we did the Boston Forum, now we have the Beijing Forum. And next time let's do Washington Forum. So let's work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting to realize that as important as the global challenges are intrinsically, that maybe one of the most important things about them is their capacity to force the kind of cooperation that otherwise wouldn't happen, and that the results of that might actually be as important as addressing the problems themselves. So that there's this interesting sort of use, if you like, of the fact that we're in a terrible moment of simultaneous systemic crises, which actually provide an opportunity to compel cooperation when otherwise it might not happen. I'd just like to begin this session by recognizing that I'm very pleased that there are 4 additional people besides Henry and myself from the China-West Dialogue here, the first of which is Françoise Nicolas next to me from IFRI in France, Julia Ganter from the Korber Foundation in Berlin, Martin Albro, my good friend from the UK, who is not only a China expert but a writer, he's now calling himself, and Mabel Miao, who was with us in Berlin in May, and of course in the July 28th meeting in Boston. And in addition, we have Christiane Kastrup and Agnes Michalek from the Global Solutions Initiative, where 21 of us from the China-West Dialogue self-funded ourselves to go participate in the Global Solutions Summit in Berlin in May. So let me just start out by saying, to try to give some context for this particular session on international norms and global engagement platforms. I think a good point of departure of why did we decide, it may be obvious from the session we just had, but why did we decide that international norms would be a good thing to focus on? Well, one of them is this concept that I mentioned this morning about reputational capital. But the other was, quite frankly, the Bali G20 summit. The 4th paragraph of the Bali summit, which, as I said this morning, was something like 50 pages long. I'm going to read it all to you because I think it's an astonishing paragraph for the G20 summit, which thinks of itself as an economic governance forum, global economic governance forum, to have embraced what I'm about to read to you. It is essential to uphold international law and the multilateral system that safeguards peace and stability in the world. This includes defending all the purposes and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and adhering to international humanitarian law. And let me just pause there to say that the term international humanitarian law applies to the Geneva Protocols on protection of combatants and civilians. So it's a very specific thing, which is actually quite relevant at this particular moment in history, including the protection of civilians and the infrastructure in armed conflicts. The use or threat of use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible. The peaceful resolution of conflicts, efforts to address crises, as well as diplomacy and dialogue are vital. And this is a phrase that was put in by Prime Minister Modi. Today's era must not be of war. So it's quite a remarkable thing in an economic summit that it tells you something about the moment. And I myself for years have as a G20 proponent and watcher and sometime contributor, have felt that it is a broader forum than just an economic one, and that it was perfectly legitimate for it to be that because it's a leaders forum and leaders have broad responsibility. And furthermore, as unfortunately we're learning in some of the more negative dimensions, that economics and security are connected in any case. So that it seems to me, sort of sticking to economics, which itself is a silo, is a little bit limiting when it comes to political leaders who have maximum responsibility for their countries. So we've thought that illustratively, some of the things we might do is to consider putting, actually writing some language that gets into more detail about international humanitarian law. And the International Committee on Red Cross has actually enunciated 10 things the rules of war do. And they're quite poignant now when you look at both the conflict in the Middle East and the conflict in Russia, in the Ukraine with Russia. So that is one area. The other area that I think is quite important, I was reading something yesterday on the fast train here from Shanghai, that it won't surprise you to know that France is the country with the most nuclear plants, which is 56. But it might surprise you to know that China is the second largest number of nuclear plants, which is 55. And so not far off the trail of the leading country with nuclear plants. And China's planning to build potentially 70 more. So I think this might be a case in terms of not only reputational capital, but maybe self-interest, in which China might be inclined to support what are called the 7 pillars. I won't read them to you, but the 7 pillars for nuclear safety of nuclear plants. Because in a way, if there's to be nuclear plants, they need to be secure. And we've seen in the Ukrainian case where they haven't been. And so I think it's sort of a kind of sweet spot to go into, because it tightens up the kind of consciousness about the importance of safety at home of your own nuclear plants, our own nuclear plants in the US and everywhere else, but also the fact that this should really be off bounds in terms of war. I mean, the fact that 2 plants in the Ukraine were invaded and jeopardized in the war is, war is war. But this is a case where it seems like taking a stand could really be quite productive. And there's the World Organization of Nuclear Operators, which I happen to know from my personal experience, having known someone who was French, actually, who was president of WANO, the World Association of Nuclear Operators. They have been in the past very reluctant to take strong positions on all of this. They are no longer reticent, and I think we might find some useful language in that area. And there are other areas which we might go into, and we would seek having your advice and contributions on what you think might be useful ways to to strengthen international norms in ways that would impact the geopolitics of the current moment. I'd like to call first on Bruno. I'm not going to try to pronounce your last name, Bruno, because he is in the regulatory area on artificial intelligence and technology, and has some thoughts about how to bridge the session we just had to this one. So Bruno, if you'd lead us off, please.
Thank you very much, Colin. I would like indeed to talk 2 minutes about the link from perhaps the limits to pluralism, and how do we move from the limits to pluralism to international norms and standards, which I think is the topic of this session. We agree then that pluralism is about respect of each other's identity, values, culture, collective preferences. But and it's clear that the fact that you, and I say you, anybody, is different from me is not a good reason from not being in business with him. However, there are limits. And the limits today, for instance, is respecting the integrity of a sovereign country. And this has immediate consequences at the international level. I know that you talked about Bali. I wonder whether you were talking about Bali or Delhi. I think it was Delhi you talked about, the communique that you read.
No, it was Bali.
It was Bali.
Bali
Okay.
in November of 2022.
Okay, so I'm talking now about Delhi. Delhi,
Yes.
September 23.
Right.
And you could see that, we tried with our project on the global governance of the digital ecosystems, we tried to push the concept of a global digital board, which would be an inclusive body where governments, industry, NGOs, civil society would try together to identify the areas on AI, on data, etc., where there are conflicts and where it's difficult to move forward. We were blocked because a number of major players told us, sorry, Bruno, G20 is not the right forum for that. So we went backwards, and that is how you had G7 and G7 plus. G7 plus Hiroshima, which is a way to be as inclusive as possible, not to limit the government of world's affairs to a limited number of rich countries, but to try to widen it. Now, of course, we know that it's not widened enough. There's a limit to it, but it's already an attempt to move forward. So my point would be, despite the fact that today's global, because of the global challenges that we've mentioned, and we could have added a number of others, health, for instance, it's clear that we need to concentrate, and that's perhaps the way forward, to concentrate on the strategic issues on which each country cannot afford not to engage. And that's basically, and Henry has mentioned it, that's what's happening in climate. Climate is a good example where we managed to move forward in the right direction. Now, on digital, we have a number of initiatives, in fact, a myriad of initiatives on AI. And we see that some of those are within the G7 plus forum. And I'm happy to see that the UK has taken the initiative of inviting China to the conference that they're going to organize that Rishi Sunak is going to organize in September. So I think the only way is to manage our difference, to make them coexist. But again, let's not forget that there are limits, because a number of our countries are subject to public opinions. They need to be re-elected. And this is something that we have also to take into account. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's try to do, that was a good length of introduction, Bruno, good to set a good example, but let's try to do crisp 3-minute introductions so we can get around the room and maybe go around the room, or at least have some people who are able to intervene more than once. But, and can we do I learned this at the OECD, can we do this to indicate your interest in speaking? I see Francoise right away, so the rest of you have a bit more time to put up your flags. Francoise, good to see you.
Okay, well, good to have me here. Okay, well, I would like to pick up on the points that Henry made, at least 2 of the 3 points that he made. And I would be, I guess, a little bit negative. I'm sorry for that. It would sound a note of caution, which goes a little bit in the same direction as what was said right before. On climate, I agree with you that it is the thing that everybody mentions as the possible area for cooperation. That's the obvious one. The problem is, I think, that it is easy to say. It is slightly more complicated to act on climate. So there are a number of declarations, but then to walk the talk is slightly more complex. And one problem I see with regards to climate is that you bump into economic interests very quickly, even about climate. If you look at what the US is doing with the IRA is, well, to help the ecological transition in the US, but then, well, it clashes with other countries' interests. Same thing for the anti-subsidy investigation that the EU is launching. Well, if you exclusively think about climate, you may think that it's a good thing to have cheap electrical vehicles coming from China, but we do not see it exactly the same way because of economic interest. Because the car industry in Europe is huge, and we don't want the car industry to disappear. So, okay, we agree on climate, we agree that something should be done about climate, but very, very quickly, national economic interests pop up, and this makes things quite complicated. So that's my first point on climate. Second thing about infrastructure. So there are 2 things I would like to say about infrastructure. Well, the first thing is that infrastructure, at least as far as the digital dimension of it is concerned, is really a package. So when you have competition, I agree with you that competition may be healthy in infrastructure. That's good. We have a global gateway, Belt and Road, Build Back Better World, etc., etc. That's good and healthy. The problem is that very often, together with hard infrastructure, comes soft infrastructure, standards, norms. And so when you have competition in hard infrastructure, you also have underlying competition in soft infrastructure, in norms and standards. So that may make things slightly more complicated than what we think at first. So that's one first point on infrastructure. Same thing about the digital thing. Well, it was rightly said right before that norm standards reflect national preferences. I agree with you. And if you look at what the digital governance looks like in different parts of the world, they reflect very different philosophies. We have basically 3 digital realms. The EU one, which is more people-centric, I would say. The US one, which is very much big company-centric. And the China one, which is control-dominated. And so these are 3 very, very different approaches. And so it will be quite difficult also to reconcile these various approaches. So on digital, I don't see much scope for cooperation, at least for easy cooperation. Well, I guess I'll leave it here at this stage. And sorry for sounding so negative, but I think we have to be, well, candid and realistic and not naive about the possibilities for cooperation.
Absolutely. So the first placard I saw up was you, madam. So if you, Colin, you first.
Okay, thank you, Professor Bradford. My name is Dai Ruijun from Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and it is great honor for me to be invited to participate in this grand event. And I would like to start with one of the keyword of the Charter of the United Nations, that is human rights. Yeah, and it is also one of the 3 pillars of the United Nations. And after that, I would like to try to explore some convergence, if there are some. We could work together. As for human rights, I think many people may believe they are based on norms stem from the Western civilization. But actually, it is not the whole picture. And as we all know, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted in 1948, this year is the 75th anniversary of this document. And this declaration is considered as the cornerstone of international human rights law, and it embodies actually a global moral consensus on human rights. Drafters of this declaration came from both West and East, including China. And the Chinese representative, Dr. Zhang Pengchun, or Pengchun Chang, maybe, yeah, he was the vice chair of the drafting team of this declaration, and he had successfully incorporated the Confucian philosophy into this declaration. Besides Mr. Zhang, there is still another Chinese scholar named Luo Zhongshu, and he had also made some contribution to the birth of international human rights law. Actually, he participated in a survey which was carried out by the UNESCO in around the 1940s to assist the draft of the Universal Declaration. And Mr. Luo also proposed some ideas of the human rights philosophy in China. And because of the time limit, I will not go into detail of his contribution, but most of his contribution or his proposal got positive response in the later International Bill of Human Rights. So studies have already showed that the source of international human rights law are embedded in various civilizations, and the Western view of human rights is only a local discourse, and also it is very influential. Therefore, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is proclaimed as a common standard of achievements of all people and all nations. Actually, I would like to mention another case, a recent case. It is the 54th session of the Human Rights Council, which was concluded a few days ago. And during this session, a resolution initiated by China and some Western developing countries named Promoting and Protecting Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights in the context of inequalities was adopted through consensus. Why this case is special? Because firstly, this resolution was adopted by consensus, not by a vote. Actually, this is rare in the history of Human Rights Council because in the past, whenever there is a resolution proposed by China or some developing countries, the Western countries, especially the United States and the UK, would oppose it and ultimately put it to a vote. But this one was adopted by consensus. And secondly, because this resolution is related to the rights of economic, social, and cultural rights. And but the EU and the US expressly, clearly expressed their willingness to join in the consensus. This is also rare because, at least for the United States, it's not yet a state party to the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the United States is always challenging the human rights attributes of economic, social, and cultural rights. So this adoption of this resolution, maybe to some extent, demonstrate that there might be some convergence or common sense between the West and the East, between the developed and the developing countries, even in today's conflict and confrontation era, to reach some consensus in the area of human rights. So at last, when it comes to exploring some convergence beyond the climate change, I think maybe some topics in the area of human rights, such as equality and non-discrimination, protection of rights and freedoms of vulnerable groups, or not let anyone to left behind, especially in the digital area, digital age, might be some convergence. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I'm not going to go into it, but we have actually had a session on quite a productive session, or two actually, on human rights, and your comments are quite in line with what you gave. Some historical background that I didn't know, but quite in line with what we've been thinking about on that issue itself. So I'm just going to go down to the next two. Sabina, is that your name? I can't
It's
read
all right,
vertically
Colin. My
very
name
well.
is
Yes.
Shada Islam. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. And I'm really very delighted, A, to be here, Henry and Mabel, thank you, and B, to speak after you. Because what I'm going to say is a bit similar, but I'm going to put it a bit differently. I am Senior Advisor at European Policy Center, and I'm Visiting Professor at the College of Europe in Natolin. That's who I am. I know that the world likes formality and structures and hierarchies. And a world that is patriarchal, in essence, adores formality and officialdom. But I think in the world that we live in today, and we're seeing it in our streets of Europe and across the world, there is a real desire for informality and to work to tackle our challenges not through official structures, but through informal channels. And that is why I think this multipolar world, Colin, that we're talking about, and that you call the shifting coalitions of consensus, and I say often in what I write, and what I tell my students, it's a mix and match world. It's an a la carte world. Countries are not being put in silos and channeled into binary choices. They're not doing it. It's spontaneous. And we're seeing it now, and we need it now. We need it now in the Israel-Palestine conflict. We need it now in Russia-Ukraine. We've seen countries coming in. It's Turkey, it's Qatar. The United States and China cannot handle it. The European Union cannot handle it on its own. So we need these alliances. We need these partners to come in at this point. So that's the first thing, is it's an informal world. This multipolar world is going to break away from the constraints, and I would say the shackles of institutions where countries will have to work. Whether they're global north or global south, collective west, global south, they'll have to work together in informal alliances. And G20 is good for the moment, but it has to break up into smaller groups, minilaterals, plurilaterals, a la carte, as I was saying. And the second point that we're seeing now is the importance of young people. Young people, very, very important. I think we have to break away from this generational divide that exists as well, where the policies are being made by elderly gentlemen, if I may put it that way, whereas the young people, as we're seeing in the streets, want peace and reconciliation. I myself am not very young, so I'm saying this knowing what I'm saying. So the three areas where I think we need to work, of course, climate change, and my friend Françoise has said very clearly the dangers and the challenges there, but I think it's sustainable development goals. SDGs, I mean, I know that we all sort of talk about the SDGs and then put them away and say, okay, that's done. But those are essential if we're going to build a more equal world. If we're going to protect the vulnerable, if we're going to protect education, health, etc. So I would say multipolarity in many ways is a challenge, but I would say that it is also a blessing. It's a reality, and we have to work with it and not try and impose structures on it which actually will not be of benefit to us. Thank you very much.
Yes, Colin, you've...
Okay, thank you, Chairman, to giving me this chance to have my talk, because previous panels I lost the chance to talk, right? Now, I would like to give us the 3 points in my presentations. First, I do think that we should go beyond the ideological politics. Unfortunately, we look around the world, we have been divided into different camps of ideology, right? So more democracy or non-democracy. But I think that's this kind of the patterns make the world get into the tragedy, patterns, like the Cold War period, right? And now we're heading closer towards the new Cold War. So there will be real problems. But I do think that all of us would like to, go beyond the kind of Cold War mentality and the patterns. The reason why we all sit down around this table from all over the world. So I think that we should do something to go beyond the power politics and the ideological politics. And the second point I would like to say that this world also have been composed by the plural culture and civilizations. Of course, we are different, right? But regarding the background of culture, nobody, even no country, can take the opposition, against each other. So I do think that our American friends would like to, to respect the Confucius, right? And our Chinese would like to respect the Western's Jesus Christ, or other philosophical, key scholars in the Western academia. So I think that's regarding the world, even though we are make differences between us with the background of culture, but we should share this culture. So the reason why our Chinese would like to set the value, which is the civilizational value, not just the political value. And our Chinese love the freedom democracy, original from the Western academia and civilization. And I do think that our Western scholar also love the Chinese civilizational value. So the third point I would say that maybe we should reshape the new style of politics. I would like to use a word called civilization politics. Go beyond ideological politics and power politics. We know that in 19th century, power politics makes so many wars among our human society. And ideology differences make the Cold War in the 20th century. And now, in the 21st century, we should try to move ahead towards the civilization politics. I mean, all the countries based upon our own civilization. For example, like in East Asia, China, Japan, South Korea, or some country in Southeast Asia, we all belong to the East Asian civilization. We should have our own community based upon our civilization value. Of course, the United States as a sympathizer of the Western civilization, that's good. China respects our American civilization or Western civilization. So that's the reason why I would say that East and West could sit down together like this round table. And even I would like to propose to Huiyao, maybe next year, if you have set the themes for this dialogue, maybe could give a word like this: we forum. We forum means West and East. So West and East, we also belong to the humanities, right? And we share our, global civilizations, and also we, even though we have different civilizational background, but we can sit down together as a human being. So the we forum could be united between the East and the West for our human activities, like anti-globalization, and like the climate change, and in the global community. Okay, that's my point. Thank you.
So could I just call on the three of you here in this corner? Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Today, our topic is dialogue between China and USA. Really, we have one dialogue. But usually, frankly, dialogues between China and the US were not like dialogue. Factually, they were more like argument. It is normal to have arguments, and arguments are not a bad thing. The debate between China and the US basically rooted in the following three levels. First, the interests. China and the United States are each other's important trading partners. China and the United States share many common economic interests. If this partnership is undermined, both sides will suffer huge losses. But China and the United States also have different interests. China is a developing country, and so far, China's greatest interest is development. The United States is already a developed country and is the richest country in the world. Development is not its greatest interest. Its greatest interest is to maintain hegemony, economic hegemony, military hegemony, and a cultural hegemony. There will certainly be conflict between the two largest economies. One is for development, and the other for hegemony. Second, responsibility. There are different understandings of rules. In the past few decades, the international economic balance of power has changed profoundly. But the global governance system has failed to reflect the new changes and is not representative and inclusive enough. An important difference between China and the US is the different understanding of rules. When Americans talk about rule-based international relations, they mean a set of rules. The Chinese also speak of rules, but they are referring to a different set of rules. That is an international system with the United Nations at its core and an international order based on international law. Third is value. It is a different understanding of political systems and political values and a development path. There are fundamental differences between Chinese and American political values. Americans consider their nation as a city on a hill, and the world should look up. The political values of the United States are universal values, and the whole world should adopt such universal values. Any governments that does not conform to the democratic model is authoritarian. What Americans understand as modernization is westernization. The Chinese believe that countries have different national conditions, different cultures, and different histories. Countries have the right to choose different paths of development. The debate on the three levels will continue for a long time and will not go away anytime soon, and there is no need to rush to complete agreement. Our mission is to transform argument into real dialogue. How? It is a good way to seek truth from facts, more inclusiveness, more constructive, more mutual respect, more equality, more negotiations, less prejudices, less speaking from the position of strength. Treat each other as equals, respect each other, and then we can hear each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. My name is Shifeng Zhu from Tsinghua University, Dean of the School of Public Policy and Management and the Executive Director of the Institute for Sustainable Development Goals. Today's session's topic is the international norm and international cooperation. I think for international organizations, the most inclusive and authoritative international organization is the United Nations, which plays the most important role in resolving international conflicts, economic social development and sustainable development in the world. The UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals adopted in 2015 includes 17 goals across economic, social, and environmental domains, as serves as an important document for the global development. Since the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, countries have made significant progresses in implementing sustainable development goals. Some goals has already been achieved, such as China's early completion of poverty alleviation tasks by 2020. In addition, the international community is strengthening cooperation and coordination to jointly address global challenges. However, in the process of implementing the United Nations Development Agenda, there are also a lot of difficulties and challenges. First, some developing countries lack the economic, technological, and human resources to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. The second is some developing countries still face internal and external imbalances in political, economic, and social aspects. In addition, the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war in particular has strengthened the imbalance in developing among the countries, especially the LDCs, least developed countries that have just lifted themselves out of poverty, have rapidly returned to poverty. So in terms of China, Chinese President Xi Jinping proposed the Global Development Initiative in 2021. The initiative proposed that the developing countries should strengthen their capacities to achieve economic, social, and environmental coordination and development and eliminate poverties. So the GDI is of great significance for promoting the implementation of 2030 Agenda for SDGs globally. First, the GDI provides important support and guidance for the LDCs to achieve sustainable development. This initiative emphasizes that importance of the poverty alleviation, promoting economic growth, improving education and health levels, and protecting the environment, and proposes significant actions, plans, and goals. Second, the GDI has received widespread support from the international communities, including the United Nations, governments of countries, and international organizations and non-governmental organizations. The establishment of group of friends of Global Development Initiative in 2022 show that they have a strengthened partnership. So in summary, the GDI provides important support and assistance for the least developed countries to achieve 2030 Agenda. So currently, the implementation of GDI still requires joint efforts and cooperation for all parties, bridging the preferences in opinions and politics that existing among different countries, and further promoting the achievement for the Sustainable Development Agenda. In the future, we need international community to continue to strengthen cooperation, jointly promote the globe to achieving sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. I'm Tu Xinquan from the China Institute for WTO Studies of UIBE. So I'm a WTO man, not a tariff man. But to be honest, I'm afraid that the effective functioning of the international system does not depend on rules or norms, but on the leadership of the hegemony or the cooperation of hegemonic states. In the case of world trading system, since the 2008 global financial crisis, the U.S. has gradually lost its confidence and interest in sustaining the multilateral trading system to pursue and defend its own economic interests. The shrinking of U.S. manufacturing, the rising internal income inequality, the narrowing gap between the U.S. and China are perceived to be the outcome of the multilateral trading system, which offers more opportunities to China's rise. The permanent goal of the U.S. as a hegemony is to maintain its hegemony permanently. Although China has repeatedly claimed that it is not intending to take over U.S. position, the U.S. doesn't believe it, and even heightens its suspicion over China's hidden ambition or conspiracy. At the same time, China also believes that currently the U.S. will take whatever measures to contain China's development and sustain U.S. supremacy. So the fundamental dilemma for the current world is that there is neither absolute hegemony nor cooperative powers. Therefore, we should not expect the international system could function effectively as in the first 2 decades after the end of the Cold War. We have to live with this reality that the two competing powers have deep mutual distrust on each other. In my opinion, the best hope for now is to keep the great power competition peaceful as much as possible, both economically and militarily. In terms of economic competition, we should encourage and urge the two major powers to generally stick to the existing WTO rules, as well as other international rules, and at the same time, to reach interim deals about some controversial issues, such as national security. Most importantly, the two powers should give each other more policy space to take certain restrictive measures to defend their essential security interests and agree not to take tit-for-tat retaliations for their own domestic political purposes. Both sides should exercise restraint in initiating dispute settlement cases regarding national security, since the two sides' ignorance of WTO rulings will even hurt the authority of the WTO. Secondly, the two powers are trying to promote more active industrial policies in certain sectors. They could work along with other interested parties to reach temporary or permanent clarifications about the agreement on subsidies and countervailing duty measures, giving more policy space to each other to make and implement their industrial policies, especially those related to environmental protection and climate change, which could produce global positive spillovers. Moreover, if economic theories are right that subsidies won't work finally, just let all of them fail. Domestic politics will punish those incompetent governments. To conclude, for now, we would better adopt a kind of appeasement policy with looser constraint on each other and give more time for both sides to adapt to the evolution of global power structure. Thank you.
So I think we'll just shift over here to the other side of the table and just begin with you, sir.
我可能是个例外，我要用中文。
So maybe I'll be an exception, make an exception, so I'll be speaking in Chinese. Thank you for your invitation.
I'm a CCG advisor. I have been engaged in international studies for a long time. I've been deeply inspired today. I want to talk about how to strengthen international norms and increase international cooperation. I think we all feel that we are at a crucial moment. There are a lot of deficits in governance, in development, and we are lacking in cooperation platforms. And the existing international norms and international rules on relations have been challenged. And China's role in the world has also been misunderstood to a great extent. Actually, China is working hard to become an advocate of respecting international norms. Since the end of the Cold War, the world is developing toward multipolarity, and economic globalization has also experienced a lot of twists and turns. The international community hope that the big countries will shoulder more responsibilities in international governance to ensure that we will build a community of shared future for development and for common destiny. And Chinese leaders 10 years ago already said that in dealing with other countries, our goal is to find common ground and promote lasting peace and build peace and prosperity in the world. So to follow international rules and uphold international governance and promote international cooperation are the choices made by China. Our goal is actually to find the converging points among different countries and share responsibilities with different countries. And through the universally accepted approaches, we will work together to find a way for common growth and development. Second, actually, China has also made specific and practical proposals for global governance. For example, China wants to participate in science and technology governance through increased cooperation. And second, we have taken the initiative to make good use of international innovative resources to participate in the international innovation networks and build our capacity for rules making in the world. And to participate in environmental governance, we want to build good ecology in the world, and we want to ensure that our actions are environmental friendly, and we want to find the solutions to sustainable development. And China wants to participate in security governance. We hope that we can combine our own security with the common security of all mankind. That is why I have been the most active in the international peacekeeping missions. We are engaging in the fight against terrorism. We are engaging in the cooperation against human trafficking, against drug trafficking, etc. So those are all good examples. Finally, I also want to say that China has always been following the spirit of openness and inclusiveness. We are now not engaging in geopolitical little camps or blocs. We are against power politics, Cold War mentality, or bloc politics. We believe that the developed countries are not in a position to dominate world affairs. Global governance should reflect the rights and needs of all parties so that we will build a consensus for joint actions. So without cooperation, there will be no governance, and China has never denied the necessity for developed countries to participate in international governance. We want to work together with the world to promote global governance. For example, China and the United States actually have a lot of shared interests in global governance. That is something made clear by President Xi Jinping. To be together in this process will enable us to make good use of our advantages and work together to address global challenges. And China also will make a pioneering effort, take proactive actions towards this end. And President Xi has also made vivid descriptions about this Chinese commitment. We want to build efficiency, we want to fight corruption, and that is also an important requirement from the G20. Actually, G20 is another important platform for addressing global challenges. We hope that it will play a bigger role. In recent years, we have heard a lot about the three global initiatives. They are in line with the BRI, actually. They are all aimed at expanding third-party cooperation. Our purposes are simple. We want to ensure equity in development, ensure reliable security, expand our cooperation, and to implement these new initiatives, we will build more platforms for cooperation for the world. We hope that the whole world will take a more active part in the development of all those platforms. That is all from me. Thank you for listening.
That's a good summary. Martin Albro, please.
Thank you very much, Colin. I wonder if I can be a bit autobiographical. I can remember seeing the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki when it happened. I was very lucky. I was 8 years old. And in those days, a young kid could go to the cinema and see newsreels. The first newsreel would be American Cowboys, Roy Rogers. And then after the film, you would see the Pathé News. And the Pathé News showed you the explosions over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. For an 8-year-old, it was pretty shocking. In other newsreels, you saw the results of the incarceration and the burning of Jews in the German concentration camps. And you saw the open pits, the lime pits, and the skeletons. This was a vivid impression for an 8-year-old of what clearly was something pretty dramatic, and it was mirrored, of course, by President Truman, who said, "We have entered a new era." I think this was probably the first time new era was expressed in global politics. And these intellectuals of the time followed suit. The great German philosopher Karl Jaspers echoed that. The great philosopher of civilizations, Arnold Toynbee, echoed that. Now, this was the immediate impact of the end of the Second World War. Of course, the end of the First World War had had a similar intellectual impact, and Toynbee himself was echoing somebody called Oswald Spengler, who wrote a book called The Decline of the West. A forgotten book now, but Toynbee expressed a great interest in it and argued that its message was valid to his day. And Toynbee himself, of course, was a great admirer of China and saw China as eventually the civilization that could, in fact, provide a more peaceful world. Now, I give that as the background to what I'm saying simply because I think you have to look at the long term, and you also need to take account of the fact that, yes, there was wide recognition of the deep differences between civilizations then throughout the 20th century. And my own feeling is that we possibly overestimate the contribution that understanding between civilizations can bring. After all, let's face it, within the Arab world, the divisions in the Arab world go back 1,400 years or 1,300 years. They still haven't been solved. That's only within the Arab world. The misunderstandings at the level of the civilization are not something which we can allow to impede us in dealing with the existential crises of our time. And that first existential crisis was, of course, the recognition that the nuclear weapons and the discovery of the power of the atom could destroy human life. That was the first existential crisis. The next existential crisis we've already been talking about, which was environmental pollution and possibly the degradation of the environment to end human existence. The third one, of course, came very rapidly after, which was global warming, and the fourth one is even more rapidly after that, which is the potential of artificial intelligence, again, to end human life on this earth. 4 existential crises coming faster and faster on us. They are not solved actually by reconciling civilizations. There's no way we can do that. Because it's not civilizations which negotiate with each other. It's human beings, it's people. It's not even primarily, I would suggest, governments. When we meet as a group of think tanks and focus entirely on what governments do, we forget the fact that the world is now a multiplicity of organizations which cross boundaries. We only think of the most prominent ones, like, say, Greenpeace or the Red Cross, organizations like that. But the multiplicity of organizations is enormous, and it's from those, I trust, that we can see a future, and it's those which I believe will be more important in dealing with existential crises, because, of course, there we have the experts. We have the people who, in fact, find out things, create things. They actually handle the technologies. The scientists are there to direct those things. And we have to remember, modernization was never led by countries. Modernization was led by scientists, technologists, and so on. So we ought to be negotiating directly, my view is, with what broadly I've called in the past global civil society. It's global civil society. We need the next conference. Henry, yes, the next one is for you and your centre to have a conference for global civil society, and then I think we might get a bit further forward in dealing with what is the existential crisis at the moment for human beings on this earth. We haven't got a lot of time. We really have not got a lot of time, to my view.
Thank you. Christian, welcome.
Thank you, Colin. I would first of all thanks a lot for this conference. That's really a great thing. So also to the Chinese friends and to the China-West dialogue. It's really an awful gathering. I'm from a Global Solutions Initiative, which is a kind of an offspring of the G20 group. So we work with respective presidencies, and we are right now starting to work with the Brazilian presidency on their G20 portfolio. And so I will bring more into practice, and I know quite a bit about the G20 because I was part of the program team in the late 90s when the G20 was then a proposal and was then decided at the so-called Cologne summit. So that's a very interesting history, but I will not allude longer into that. So, but what we clearly see right now, on top of what happened to the G20, in fact, we really see, and I would support all those speakers before me who said that, there is a kind of a, it's a substantive breakdown of the global governance and of a 70 years consensus of an after-war system. And I have to say immediately that this is for sure not useful any longer for the global future, for our common global future. So there's this famous say, Houston, we have a problem, and I would say it again, it's not just Houston, but the world, we really have a problem. So, and of course, we have this problem in spite of all these pressing problems. We have the global commons, the global common goods, and they were mentioned here already. So it's about, I just had one of the panels of the World Health Summit in Berlin 2 weeks ago, and it is really, really a big issue. Pandemia is looming again. We have a health issue, we have energy, we have natural resources which are very uneven distributed all over the globe. We have an issue with climate anyway, but beyond, it's also digital and artificial intelligence. We need to have also some rules of the game here, or say really at least a little bit of a common global ethics of what we do with this, also with respect to disinformation, privacy, and all other issues you all know very well. And of course, they have to be seen in different political environments, and they are all in a way to be respected. Let me also say that very clear. And then there is, of course, the issue of science and technology. value chains will also change a lot, and this will also influence our economic system to a large degree. We will now talk more about the security of global value chains and about the sustainability of global value chains, and we will probably less talk about ultimate efficiency of global value chains, and so it's not just the cheapest alternative, it's the best alternative given all other things of common goods which are involved here. So, and then let me also mention one point where we really try also to work with our annually Global Solutions Summit in Berlin in May. That's about reducing inequality and really trying to get the people along again, and this is what we mean with the recoupling the global society to the given environment. So what are we going to do now? Coming back to my open sentence about that we have kind of a collapse of global governance. And I think I would be rather open in formulating a new, say, global governance system, and I think we need it. And it will take time. I'm pretty sure we will not solve it today or in the next year. But I think we should really accept a multipolarization. We should really accept that every player in the world, and it's not just the old global players from the late 50s or the late 60s, must have an equal say here. And I think this is very important. Hard to begin. Maybe we can also check for the new global governance, again, an institutional reform. We would probably also need some front projects where everybody would like to join in. I think we could probably at least define some of them, and it's one of my pet projects, how to define these projects. We need probably also a flexible geometry of global governance, which means that we do not need anymore always unanimity. This will probably not possible on all issues, but it may be possible on some issues, and we should really refrain from this issue of building certain blocks. I think we are all sitting in the same boat, as we say, and we will all, and this was also alluded here by my pre-speaker, that we are all in trouble if something goes wrong on global governance and saving the global common goods. So I stop here, and what I would just like to remember you at this very topical points, and we really need to solve them. We need global solutions quickly and soon, and we do not have another 50 years to fight several philosophies. We just have to do the job.
Thank you, Colin. The world is transforming from the carbon civilization to silicon civilization. Some people say industrial civilization to digital civilization or ecology civilization. I think this is the major background of our discussion. In China, political narrative we saw, the West is the American-led West, 美西方. But in the digital world, American leadership is relatively declining. That's the reason I think the European Union put forward the digital sovereignty. European Union was strategic autonomy. So you cannot blame the rise of Europe to challenge American leadership. It's the new world. What is implications for China and the West dialogue? So for the United States, I think firstly, you should distinguish what kind of challenges because of China rise as a power, so power politics, or because of the world transforming, the new civilization. And then the American political system or civilization not adapt so kind of this new trend and then blame China. It's like this globalization, China as a scapegoat. Put China as a scapegoat cannot solve the Americans' problem. It's like the trade deficit. It's American US dollar hegemonic power, so it's not because of China, made in China too much. So that's very important. So every country, every civilization need to adapt a new environment. So that's Yi Jin, we learn from that. I think China also felt many challenges for the digital civilization. And what is the competition or dialogue between China and the West, particularly China and the US? In the morning, many people mention about cooperation, competition, but this is always combined together. So the competition is who can provide more suitable public goods for the human transformation of the civilization, not public baths. It should be public goods. I think the China-US, China-West competition is about that. In this regard, of course, cooperation, competition combined together. So what do we understand of this dialogue of China and the West? There's no pure China or pure West. China is in the West, West also in China. It's like we learn from Ubuntu, I am because we are. So maybe US define China, China also define the US, although in the general of the West. So the West is not the ideology meaning, but it's also civilization meaning. It's not the old civilization meaning, it's a new kind of civilization meaning. So in this regard, I think what's the norms competition between China and the West we can provide. The conclusion is, first, we should change the paradigm from the capital-driven to human-oriented scenario. The second, power and the rights always need to combine together. But there is no power to define rights or right to defend power. They are mutually connected or twinned. This is a shared, not just a shared power, shared rights. Even the power and the rights also be shared. Thirdly, I think the proposals, regionalism of the new initiative compete each other between China and the United States. For instance, like Belt and Road Initiative, Americans like the B3W, whatever. There's the, which community will be most inclusive to every participants in this planet, then will be more welcome. I think the maximum or the most inclusive definitely is, Martin says, a global community of the shared future. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Chen Yang. I come from Kicker, a more realistic think tank. When I received the topic about the international room and this global engagement platform, I was a little surprised because I think those concept is all about the global governance. And global governance is a dying concept in such a new area. And for example, the Chancellor or Chairman said about the Zeitwende, and the EU Commission used to be the strong supporter of the global governance. Right now, you want to build the geopolitical commission. I was so delighted to see so many idealists here to participate in this meeting to talk about this global governance. Frankly speaking, I do not think it's the right time to talk about that. These domestic issues occupy the priority in so many countries' agenda, especially in big powers. And under the extent of the persistent geopolitical confrontation, there is not so much space and dynamic left for cooperation of international issues. I just come back from a trip around Paris and Berlin. I heard so many people talk about China, but sadly I have to say most of them are negative. De-risking, systemic rival, economic peak of China, and recently panic of the Chinese EV. They said China had dramatically changed economic, political, and style of foreign policy. Overall changed. They mentioned about COVID, support the evil Russia or Putin, confrontation with the United States as the cause of the change. We have to explain our policy time and time again. And one day when I went up, I see the mirror. I say, this guy is no change. And during the meeting, I see the guys run the table. I see they are not change. We are not change. But why? Why come those so many of difference? Suddenly I know that the whole Europe's perception of China has changed. I don't want to judge this change right or wrong, but we have to recognize that they exist and will prevail among the social groups for a long time. And they reduce the trust between China and Europe, added burden to cooperation in this relationship. Nowadays, Russia and West Bloc are at war, and United States hostile towards China are growing. If Europe and China cannot build their mutual trust, the world may tear into two opposite blocs, and whom the global governance can count on. So we need to do something to save the paralyzed systems of our world in order to avoid the human civilization falling apart. Firstly, my personal view, we should focus on the fact, but not some exaggerated language. Just like Europe's security depends on US and economic depends on China. I don't think it's true. If you look at the FDI, China only accounts 70% of Germany's outflow FDI, and US count on the 22%. Many scholars criticize China supporting Russia or Putin, but that's not true. If China stands with Russia, the whole picture of the Ukraine conflict will change. Many articles and papers said China's ambition is to surpass the United States and dominate the world. That's not true. You can see many articles and papers discuss about great rejuvenation, but no word mentioned about dominating the world. As the number one superpower to dominate the world is not in the Chinese culture, nor least in the Chinese dream. We should not fall into the perception or negative trap. I see the trap. For example, the three dimensions of Sino-European relationship. We all know that there are so many differences between China and EU. They always there and didn't change too much since Sino and EU relation set up. But if we put the difference into the strategic guideline, that would seduce people to think about the difference and turn the policy to more defensive but no cooperating. Also about the decoupling, between the China and USA. In my view, there is no coupling, between China and USA. Always, de-risking. If you emphasize the de-risking, maybe the real risking will come in. So, second, I think we could explore some areas that needed urgently for global governance. Something like the professor has mentioned about the nuclear. I think in today's world, the threshold of using nuclear weapon seems to decline quickly. Nuclear proliferation seems cannot be stopped. We need a new mechanism to stop the use of a nuclear weapon. When I was in E3, the Colin has said that the nuclear age is coming. It's very dangerous. Another area that I think is about AI. One of the regions that I think that Ukraine can resist the powerful Russia's attacks, and Hamas there to challenge the dominance of Israel's army is the zone participate in the war. If the war more and more looks like a media game, the conflict could outbreak anytime, anywhere. There is an old saying that the earth turns around with you or without you. I sincerely hope that will not be the destiny of the human being. Thank you. That's all.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to comment a little bit on the concept of pluralization, and I think this is a very powerful concept for the reasons that you set out earlier, Colin. I think it does a lot more conceptually for us than the idea of multipolarity. It helps cope with the century of complexity and uncertainty that we're currently facing. It seems good as a method, as a sort of intellectual method, but also as a policy approach to bring more players into the discussion. I think it can also operate as a norm, which is the subject of this current panel. You know, it's a good thing in its own right. And based on that, I had two slightly granular comments relating to your initiative. The first of those, if you don't mind me making this comment, is I just wonder if the name China-West Dialogue really does justice to the richness of the concept of pluralization. It sounds a little bit binary and perhaps a little bit constraining. So I wonder if in a further development you've got a way of headlining that notion of pluralization a little bit more. I confess I wasn't very familiar with your initiative until the preparation for this meeting.
I'll just respond to that straight away because we've had first of all, I mentioned this morning that we founded this in 2019 with 11 people in the room, one of whom was Nicolas Véron from France. And he immediately objected to the thing, and with good reason. But we sort of plowed ahead. It seemed not to detain us too much. But what happened later was it came up again, maybe provoked by Nicolas or not. I can't remember who provoked it at that point. And a few of us did spend an hour or two kind of thrashing it out, trying to think of something else. And to make a long story short, we just couldn't find anything else that was better. But it is problematic, and we understand what you mean. So,
thank you, Colin. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to think of anything better myself, so I can't contribute more meaningfully to that discussion now. But my second comment, I think on the outline, the one-page outline, you have a reference to establishing dialogues to replace confrontational narratives. And I think that is an incredibly good and important objective. But for the reasons that many people have outlined here, including the excellent comments from a previous speaker, Mr. Chen Yang, confrontational narratives are not going to go away. They're not going to be replaced. They're not, unfortunately, replaceable for reasons of domestic politics, for reasons of international structure, of interests, of power, and so on. I wonder if the concept of pluralization can be brought to bear on this, though, that rather than replacing confrontational narratives, we seek to find ways to pluralize the narratives that are out there. And clearly those narratives are very negative about China in Europe at the moment. I totally agree again with the previous speaker. But trying to find space and to encourage a wider range of narratives, because there are alternative narratives, but they tend to be at the other end of the spectrum from the very negative ones. And there's not very much in the middle. There's not very much space in the middle. And I think those of us who sometimes try to occupy that space with things we say or write find it very difficult to do. So pluralizing narratives, I wonder, may be a more realistic and in the long term perhaps more productive goal than trying to replace them with dialogue or with alternative narratives. So apologies for being slightly granular on your concept note, but I found it very inspiring, and I think the concept of pluralization has a lot of power to it, and wish you every success with the initiative. Thank you, Colin.
It's good to get your support. You're a political scientist, are you not?
My background is in China studies, but I'm more on the politics, international relations, political economy side. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's just good to get that support, because I realize today how often I need to sort of spell out what it's about for people to clearly understand it. And I do appreciate coming from a political scientist. I have the misfortune of being a dismal scientist and economist, and so it means we may be making some headway. But I also like, in light of the previous conversation, just to insert here, is think about this, Tim and the rest of you, is if pluralism is a significant, could be a big debate about whether it's currently the dominant or potentially the dominant political dynamic in the world. But if it is, in fact, an existing force, an existing dynamic, I think one of the things it implicitly does, quite frankly, is address the issue that a number of you brought up today, which is the desire for hegemony on the part of the U.S. and potentially debatable about whether it's the desire of China or not, but the concern that the U.S. has that China has the same ambition that we do. And I think implicitly, if you think about it, I'd be curious to have some discussion of it if you wish, either now or by email, is implicitly, I think it does put some constraints on the capacity of any. I think if no country wants to take sides, or most countries don't want to take sides, is probably a better way to say it, it seems unlikely that people want to follow a leader, that they want to embrace. And the reason they don't want to take sides is to protect their political space in the world arena. It seems like the seeking to be a hegemonic power, or continuing to be a hegemonic power, is a fool's errand. Because if pluralism were to flourish, it wouldn't work. So I just throw it out there. Thank you for bringing it up. So, Gladian, yes. Gladian.
And Richard,
I'll just
Peter
switch.
Walker there.
Where's Richard?
Peter raised his plate before.
Peter Walker, yes. Yeah, I was
Oh,
just
yeah.
getting him. Yeah.
Who's up?
You.
Okay. I just wanted to put one additional topic forward, not to open a whole nother aspect of discussion. But when we talk about international norms and sustainable development, I think from the Hungarian perspective, one issue that has typically been missing in those conversations, but it's an issue that we encountered directly and tried to come up with a solution for, is demography and family formation. So a society that is forming families in which people are having children is a growing society, and one which can be more economically dynamic. A society where families are not forming and where children are not being born and raised is one that becomes more sclerotic and more oriented toward a different type of industrial production, or toward medical services and things like that. And this does, I think, relate to, I think for the most part it's been considered a part of domestic policy. You know, what are the policies that a country pursues in order to incentivize family formation, family stability, etc. But I think it should actually be considered as at least one aspect of international discussion. And I think if we check back in on this conversation 5 or 10 years from now, by that point it will be, and so we might as well go ahead and start to think about it a little bit now. I mean, through most of human history, family formation and the production of and raising of children has just been taken as a given, as an input. And if anything, in the latter part of the 20th century, international institutions were a little bit more oriented toward concern about overpopulation, and there was a thought that maybe migration is something that could solve this problem because there are some parts of the world whose industrial development isn't adequate to their population, and there are other parts of the world that need the western parts of the world are not forming families and children as frequently. Well, Hungary encountered this problem because we had a declining birth rate from the middle of the 1970s until 2010, and the country was basically bleeding population. And so we reoriented our social services systems to promote marriages and family formation. There's been an almost 90% increase in the number of marriages per year in the last 15 years. So I don't want to go on a long rant about this, but I think it is something that's worth considering, because if we think about geopolitical conflict, I don't have a well worked out theory about this, but it seems that there's something to it that that a very much aging society is more averse to risk. It's more inclined to sort of hoard its wealth and try to keep that for itself and pass it on. A younger society, at least in an industrially successful place, has a more risk-taking, more conceivably it could have a more positive approach. So again, I haven't thought it through, but I do just wonder if some of the urge toward decoupling and de-risking and the divergence and separation of the world economy is motivated in part by this fear. But anyway, for that reason and a lot of other reasons, I think in the future this topic will probably have a place in our discussions.
We'll have the Peter Walker and the Richard Walker, together.
Great, thank you. Is it on? Okay, yeah. Well, let me give just a little bit about my background. I spent many years at McKinsey focused on business. I did over 80 trips to China, serving many Chinese SOEs in the financial services world. And I never was an author, and I wasn't inclined to write. But I got so tired of every time I came over reading the US press and what was said about China and how naive and wrong it was. So I wrote a book called Powerful, Different, Equal. To cut a long story short, when I put it on the market in the U.S., my royalties took me out to dinner at a mid-sized restaurant with no wine in Manhattan. There was no interest. I went to the Times, I went to the Journal, I went to the FT, which I thought were pretty thoughtful editorials. The response was always the same. There's no market in our audience to hear that story. So I had to translate it into Mandarin. Actually did very well in China. Not because it was pro-China, simply because it was balanced. So on this whole issue of what can be done constructively on the relationship, I think one hidden asset we have that could be tapped much more aggressively. I've spent a lot of time with senior executives in the U.S. over my career. They are, by and large, totally opposed to what the U.S. is doing to the China relationship. But it's so polarized from a political point of view that every time I finish up a conversation, the response is, don't use our name. But if you look at the long-term interest of these corporations, they have a lot of clout, they have a lot of market presence, they have a lot of capital, they want to come to China, and they're hesitant right now. Why? Because they want stability for a long-term investment. They were very nervous about the whole issue of favoring SOEs at the expense of private enterprise, even though private enterprise accounts for over 100% of the wealth creation in China over the last 10 years. But they would be ready allies. They would like to see a much more laser-focused approach to national security, a much more laser approach to tariffs that met genuine security needs as opposed to things that were basically political in nature. So I think that could be a very important source of support once we get through the election in the U.S. and it's no longer the hot topic of the day. The last thing I'll say is what would be helpful on both sides of the equation. First of all, the U.S. really should stop lecturing China on its domestic policies. All it does is anger China. It has absolutely no positive impact on anything. And the other thing is, you know, China just needs to be sensitive to every time they criticize the U.S., the media completely eats it up and it's all over the papers. And so for all the people that you would want to influence over time, every comment about the U.S. is in decline, whether it's true or not, or any other criticism is just feeding the flames, and it's very counterproductive. Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Richard Walker, yes.
I should clarify that we're no relations. I think you could probably populate an entire country out of people called Walker. Thanks. I just want to make a little observation and leading up to a question before tomorrow, just by way of introduction. I don't think I'm in the pamphlet. I was a late confirmer, but Richard Walker with Deutsche Welle in Berlin. And I just want to make a comment and then lead to a question about sort of self-reflection. And this was kind of prompted partly by a couple of people here mentioning that they attended the Global Solutions Summit, which Christian Kastrop just referred to just earlier, where I had the pleasure of interviewing Chancellor Scholz on the stage. And as an opening question, we were all talking about, you know, the Ukraine war was hanging in the air. So I asked him, you know, as the West, as Germany and other Western countries try to seek support in the global South for their position over Ukraine, does it need to look itself in the mirror about what it did in Iraq, what it did in Afghanistan? You know, is it time to kind of think about even saying sorry? And this got quite a response, and a couple of people here have mentioned this to me, and Chancellor Scholz did start talking about the West having to avoid double standards. And that was a moment of self-reflection and self-criticism from Scholz, which I found very interesting. Okay, what's this got to do with today? Well, I've just been listening during the course of today, really, but I've been really struck that there has been a lot of criticism of the United States. You would almost get the impression that it's only the United States' fault the relationship between the US and China is so bad. But that cannot be. There's also been a lot of self-criticism from the United States and also other Western delegates here, which I think is appropriate. Self-reflection and self-criticism is good. But I haven't heard that from Chinese hosts. I haven't heard that from Chinese delegates here. And I'd be very interested, maybe moving into tomorrow, in the discussions tomorrow, to hear from Chinese delegates, do you feel that there are areas where China has made mistakes, where it could have acted better, where it could have acted more constructively? It's a big question to raise at the end of the day, maybe something to take into tomorrow. I'll certainly be listening and curious to hear what people say. Thanks.
Okay, I think we still have a bit of time before we go to the reception, and so we'll extend a bit. But I see there's a few delegates on this panel, like Julia from Kobo Foundation and Mr. Zhang Wei, and also Andrew, haven't spoke yet, and also Mabel, yeah. So maybe we just finish all the panelists on the list.
Yeah, maybe it's a good moment for me to talk because I'm German and I can represent maybe a little bit the discourse in Germany. As you've mentioned, there is going on quite some self-reflection at the moment, and I think actually it's a good moment to talk about how will we make multilateralism work in a multipolar world. And I think this is especially the question that is being asked in Berlin at the moment. It was a question that was also raised by the Chancellor in his speech at the United Nations General Assembly in September in New York. But when I was reading the description for this panel, I was asking myself, should we really think about alternative platforms of multilateralism? Because we have quite a few. Shouldn't we not rather think about a potential area of cooperation between China and Europe that is a reform of the existing platforms that we already have? Maybe another experience from Germany is that our Western-led alternative platforms, they haven't really been a big success. I just want to remember the Climate Club, for example. There's many countries in the Global South who did not really pick up on this idea, and the reason is that they don't feel like they want to align in any of those camps. So I think why should China care to reform these international multilateral platforms? Because, China is part of BRICS, and we've seen a BRICS expansion. It looks like quite a successful moment for the BRICS. Why should China care when they are part of these existing alternatives? I think China should care together with us, because if we want to engage more with our partners in the Global South, and global partnerships is quite a buzzword at the moment in Berlin. So it's a good opportunity to look at other places in the world. Then it should also be in China's interest to not make these countries pick a side. And I think that should be a big motivation to really work together. And I could imagine that some European colleagues maybe might wonder how this fits into a narrative that we have also of China, not only as a partner, but also as a competitor and a systemic rival. So how can we work together with a systemic rival on our international system? But I don't think that, at least from a German perspective, this is a reason why we couldn't work together on international reforms. So maybe one last word. I think to do this, both sides have to make concessions. And Germany for many, many years now is trying to advocate for a known permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. Now what I've heard in the speech, I haven't talked to officials about that, but what I've heard in the speech from the Chancellor was rather a focus on not a permanent seat, but to support others in non-permanent seats. And I think one concession that Germany could make is to focus on campaigning for others to join the United Nations Security Council. It looks like that an expansion of existing formats in G20 and BRICS is quite a trend at the moment. Why not make a P5+, why not engage China and also Germany and other European partners on a P5 expansion? And I think Joe Biden has already campaigned for a Latin American country to join the group. So I know that's kind of a big endeavor and many people think it's not possible, but I think at least from a European perspective, from a German perspective, the global partnership reach out is quite a moment at the moment. So there would be a window of opportunity to campaign for this idea, at least. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Zhang Wei, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your invitation. I've been abroad 3 times this year, twice in Geneva and 1 time in Oslo this year. I feel very big problem that which is very different from before the pandemic, that we had much more discussions around the globe with many different countries. But now I feel that many countries are closing the door in many aspects. And I think that the relationship between China and the international society becoming very politically sensitive issue, even among scholars, which is a pity. Scholars should be open to all discussions and suggestions. So in this regard, I really very much want to thank Ms. Wang for organizing this forum. And this is actually probably the first time for human rights scholars to participate in our forum. And when you talk about the international relations, human rights is, of course, a part of the international relations. For a long time, China has been a very big target for international criticism. But on the other hand, we have to see that China has been growing also from international criticism, and also we learn a great deal from other countries for the past over 40 years. I personally participated in international conference, all kinds of international conference for over 24 years time. I have to be frank to you that most of the time China is the focus for criticism, but we learn from that. And for the past years, China has moved from change a lot in our legislation, in our legal practice to catch up with international standards. For that reason, China has been upholding UN standards for the past over 40 years, over 50 years time, to learn from international society. And we benefit from this learning process. And I hope that we'll continue in this regard. And in the past several months, I've been reaching out to try to organize international conferences on human rights. But unfortunately, I see all the blocks. Every time I reach out to different friends around the world, they were telling me that, sorry, my friend, not a good time, because now we don't want to be criticized by the media. Because every time when you have any contacts with China, then you will suddenly become a media focus for criticism. So many of my friends say, no, let's wait until time is permitted. So I hope that through this forum we are able to create a healthy atmosphere for international exchange and dialogue instead of blocking all the ways for China. Thank you. I thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zhang. And I want to, Angus, you represent Global Solution. We were there in April.
Yeah.
Excellent forum. So both Colin and we had a big roundtable there too. So we'd like to hear from you, which is also G20 think tank. So why don't you speak something?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm from the Global Solutions Initiative, which we've heard already something about. So I want to make it quite short, and maybe with all the, I would say, challenges that we've heard about today, I would like to maybe end on a very hopeful note, and I think this reflects also some of the conversations that we had in Berlin in April together. I think we all saw here that we can all agree that there are major challenges that we have to face globally, that we share, and that we need to find common solutions on. And we've talked about climate being the obvious one, we talked about digital, but there's also food security, there's financing the global commons, and there's then there's health. And I think from our perspective, we need to maintain the global platforms and the dialogues open, and I think having think tanks and engagement groups on board is a really, really good example of that, because we can see their sway also within the G20. The G20 is not only the G20, it's also the engagement groups around them. It's the think tanks, it's the civil society organizations. And I think that is a really, really good starting point to solve the issues that we have and to maintain the cooperation open, and I think this is also what the Global Solutions Initiative stands for. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrews. And finally, I think Mabel, I saw you put a sign, Dr. Mabel Miao is a co-founder of Center for China Globalization, and she's the last to speak. Okay.
Thank you, Henry and Colin. Hello everyone, I'm so delighted to see so many international scholars and think tanks gathered here for our International Think Tank Innovation Summit. And I should say thank you and congratulations to CWD as well, Colin. Finally, we make this happen. Through our Boston dialogue, through our Berlin dialogue, through our so many webinars. Today we talk about multilateralism. What is the alternative international cooperation platform? I think we have existing platforms like UN, like G20, G7, and BRICS. A lot of those dominated and emerging platform. But from my perspective, I think people can pay more attention on the young people, young generation, and the women's part. I would like to propose the 2 points. The first one is, like Shada mentioned, the young generation. Of course, we should stress the dominated power, like the ancient, the existing those think tanks and many platform, as I mentioned. But like the young generation, we know that Julia from Kober Foundation, I'm also the young leader of Munich Security Conference. I'm also the founder of GYLD Global Young Leaders Dialogue. Those 2 platforms are the both platform for young people engagement, and I also know the Global Solution. You have a very great platform for young people engage with each other. This is the platform category for young people talk with each other, and I think what is our measure? What are standards for young people's engagement? I think SDG itself, it's a basic consensus for global community voted by all the UN members. I think we can talk about more about SDGs, how to achieve that. Of course, people sometimes say, oh, the people-to-people exchanges, those topics are not so sexy, not so hot topic, but I think it's a basic topic. We should improve it and do something for that. I think today we engage so many scholars, and the think tanks itself is a multilateralism success. So that's why I say congratulations to Colin and CWD. In the future, maybe we can engage more young people to participate. I just got back from this morning. I was not here because I'm the representative of the delegate of the 13th National Women's Congress in China. All the political bureau standing members of CPC participated. So the CPC and the Chinese government paid a lot of attention on the women's leadership and women's rights in all fronts. This morning, the Congress also urged all the Chinese female try our best to tell the true stories of what happened in China and the women's true stories in the modernization of China's path to modernization to the world. So we should conduct more engagement and international cooperation with the world. people will ask a question why CCG can gather so many international experts today, physically here. Let me tell you a secret. The secret is that in the past few years, during pandemic, we still very active around the world to meet with so many scholars face to face and invite most of you face to face. This is the secret of the people-to-people exchange. This is the secret of our common mission to build up the global community for the humankind of shared future. I think this is the basic rule for our dialogue. That's why I would like to call for more the engagement. And finally, I would like to say the think tank exchange itself is so important, playing the significant role for our global governance. Like this month, we invited a delegation of American young politicians visited CCG office. We had an in-depth dialogue. Those people are the bipartisan delegates of the legislative young staffs of congressmen and the senators of U.S. Those people ask a lot of questions to our counterparts of young Chinese think tankers. For example, they ask BRI. They are so interested in what happened in BRI, and we answer the question, and the further question related to the 3 initiatives initiated by China, including the Global Civilization Initiative, Security and Development Initiatives. So it's on surface, maybe in English media, those people are not so interested in our Chinese policies and the new platform initiated by Chinese government and Chinese side as Chinese think tank. But through that kind of young generation's dialogue, I found out that those people are so interested in our initiatives and the international norms initiated by Chinese side. So maybe all of us should be the observers to see what happened in the future and build up a new platform for the global engagement. So thank you again, and I would like to express my gratitude to all of our participants. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Miao. And so as a co-host of this roundtable, maybe I'll just share some thoughts before ending for the reception, and Colin will do the summary for the whole section. I think that the theme of this platform is international norms and global engagement platform, which I think is very, very important. And we talk about that. And Julia actually just now said, where are the mechanisms that we can still work on together? I think that is really great. I think we should probably work on the, first I would like to propose we work on the existing system that is still there, like UN, like WTO, like WHO. So let's improve that, let's really work on that. And for example, we heard also Mr. Zhang mention about human rights, and I think, Colin, we had 2 or 3 China West dialogue webinar devoted to that subject. And one of the proposals I thought it was good is the SDG 17 criteria. A lot of them are human rights related, poverty and women, equality, employment right, and everything. So if that 70 criteria has been agreed upon, why can't we start from there? So 193 countries voted yes for those 17 criteria. Largely also reflect human rights, and we should probably work on that and improve on that and add more things to that. Because sometimes just judging by the value, it's difficult, and because of different culture and backgrounds. But let's work on the existing things that are already established, like climate change and Paris Accord and things like that. On the platform, I would like to say a few words. I think there are some new things we need to work on. I mean, I just got an email from Graham Allison 2 days ago. He said he just published a new article in the Foreign Affairs magazine with Dr. Henry Kissinger on the AI, and he's calling for the President Xi and President Biden to talk about this issue at APEC summit to be held in November in San Francisco. So that's true. I mean, if 2 biggest AI power can really reach some consensus, even though sometimes they may have a lot of difference, like France, Nicola was mentioned, every country has a different agenda, and it's so difficult. But still, even though it's difficult, climate or infrastructure, we still have to talk. We still have to reach consensus. I mean, that's my philosophy. We really have to do that. So for AI, it's like that. But I think talk about the theme of this platform, a global engagement platform. I think there's enough global engagement platform. We should really work on it. For example, there's APEC. We've just been there for over 30 years. I mean, we should really work on that and improve on that. I was just attending a conference yesterday. We talk about FTAP, Free Trade Agreement among the Asia Pacific. It was proposed by the US. And China is very, very interested to continue that, and let's do that. And of course, I know that US has proposed the IPAF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. But it's okay. We published a report today encouraging China to join that. You know, I mean, just like China to join the CPTPP. Unfortunately, we see US is pulling out of the CPTPP, but the UK is joining that. But we'd like to see US come back again. And so those existing platforms could be a future way of building the, global mechanism. And same is true for the RCEP. I don't see the reason why US and EU cannot join RCEP. I mean, we should really expand those platforms and deeper. The same, digital partnership, digital economy partnership, which is launched by New Zealand, Singapore, and Chile, and China is applying that. I would like to see EU and other US countries join that too. And of course, the BRICS. I mean, BRICS doesn't have to stick with just BRICS. I mean, we could have the developed world in there. So, I mean, there's many ways we can, find the existing platform and let's get open. Like China said, they are open to see all kind of an initiative. We're going to have China-European dialogue tomorrow. And I know that Joseph Borrell and Foreign Minister Wang both said, China's BRI and EU Global Gateway is not contradictory. They could be complementary in some way and can find a way to collaborate. And China is willing to, as Foreign Minister Wang said at the Belt and Road Summit, China is open to BRI, to B3W, to EU Global Gateway, and all the other infrastructure mechanism. Let's find synergy. And it's not easy, as Francis mentioned. I know it's not easy. There's different standards, criteria. But let's do it through the international development banks, World Bank, AIB, and ADB, and all those things. So if we really want to find a way, we could really work together. So that's exactly the purpose of this conference, is really to build up consensus, find out new suggestions, new solutions. And I think that's why I really appreciate Colin has been doing this for the last several years dedicatedly, and CCG is willing to be part of that to really push this common consensus. So I think we have covered quite a lot, and we'll let Colin to summarize and before we go to the reception. Thank you.
Well, Henry, your enthusiasm, energy, and ambition is part of what keeps this thing going. So it has really been your role in it, and CCG's role in CWD has really made a substantial difference, and especially in this period where we're transiting since the spring from the initial period where we were talking to each other through Zoom sessions to showing up in Germany at the Global Solutions Summit in May, and then a smaller meeting in July, and then this larger meeting here and at the Shanghai Institutes of International Studies, where we just spent the last 2 days with Chen Dongxiao, who was a founding member of the China-West Dialogue. So the transition is something that is really important to our efforts, and I want to say the next steps in this, as I said, one is we need to draft a paper, and when we do that, we can rely on CCG, I'm sure, for the email addresses of the participants here, so that we can send it around to you. I just want to give you, I'll repeat it twice, my own email address, which is fairly simple: c.bradford@Brookings, where I hang my hat for the last 20 years, not literally physically inside because I've been a non-resident senior fellow, but been associated with it. cbradford@brookings.edu. Brookings is very proud that it has a university Instead, it's not Brookings.com. The Peterson Institute across the street, for which I have great respect, by the way, and friends there, is PIIE.com. Brookings. So I'm saying this in order to put it in your memory. See Bradford at Brookings.edu. So please do feel free to proactively communicate with me as the kind of catalyst for some of this, and I'll be sharing it with Henry, and we'll get a draft around and have you comment on it, hopefully before the meetings in November in Washington that we're planning to do. And then we'll revise it after that. And I should say to you here, and I should have mentioned perhaps earlier, is we're going to seek signatories for this. The document will be in two pieces. One is a full document, which I think may be quite long, and Susan Thornton, our good colleague, has been concerned from the beginning, and that's why you have the single-page summary draft. And so we revise that when we finish the longer draft. But I think I welcome everybody to participate in this, and if you get to the end of it and you have participated in it and you still don't want to sign it, that's okay, I suppose. But understand that the more people who sign it, the better off we are. If we have 20 Chinese, 20 Americans, 20 Europeans, and 20 others, it begins to add up to something and show that there's a broad set of concerns. So we do have ambitions to do that, but I don't want to inhibit people from participating in the process, which has its own intrinsic value, I think, because you would prefer not to sign it. I think that's not, so there's no compulsion to, but I think if you think this is an important exercise, it would be the more the merrier, as the phrase goes. So I think that wraps it up for today, and I really appreciate I've taken lots of notes, and it's been good to get this input, and more importantly, perhaps to engage in person as we have today, and to realize how much common concern there is, and how much energy there seems to be to try to find alternative ways of framing it, of reframing the relations, and ways forward, as Henry used this morning for the first session, as a way to somehow change the dynamics and improve the situation, not only for the U.S. and China, but for the world as a whole. So it's a pleasure to meet all of you, to hear your views, and I thank you very much for your coming and your contributions. Thank you.